Hey Brandon, it's just you and I this week. How's it going?
Finally, I have all the time to myself. We're done with Matt Ray.
That's what I was thinking. I can finally enjoy the searing insight and camaraderie of Brandon on his own.
You are a
So,
lucky person, a very
I've,
lucky person, my friend.
Matt Ray, of course, is at OSCON, and so that does make me think. In your current and previous few jobs lines of work, like is OSCON a conference that you would go to? Like, is it a commercially interesting thing?
I have personally not been, but I have worked at several companies where that's always like the one where they send the community manager and like the developers. Like that's always
Mm,
it's like, yeah, those that needs to go. There's occasionally like product management. Obviously, there's a lot of product management out there and product marketing,
yeah.
but typically it's like it just seems like it's a big party in a good way for that group
Yeah.
of people. Community managers and developers and like lots of black t-shirts. Everyone comes back with lots of black t-shirts.
Yeah, I might have even mentioned it before in our conversations here, but over the past 2 years, I have built up an overstuffed drawer full of gray and black T-shirts that are quite nice. They stopped doing those hefty ring shirts, and everyone has the what's it called? The American wearing skimpy underpants pictures people. What are they called? The American Apparel style shirts, which are nice, you know. Um, so there's that. T-shirts.
T-shirt and Oscot. But I do think it's always the same. There was a great tweet this week by Mark Andreessen, and it was good on many levels. I think it said something like, "The greatest minds of our generation are trying to convince people to pay for support contracts of open source software," and it was like. On
Really?
so many levels, it was funny, right? Because that was
Yeah.
sort of his retort to the whole like the great, everyone's working on advertising, and that's a waste of time.
Oh
And
yeah,
so,
yeah,
so he sort of got that jab in, and then he followed it up with like kind of a little funny jab at like open source in general. Where it's like, yeah, that conversation just goes on around and around and around. It's like, well, should we pay for support and indemnification? But it's free, so I don't really need to. But we need to call somebody, and then.
yeah,
Like I'm sure that conversation is taking place at OSCON, and and I'll just say I'm glad I'm not there to hear it.
yeah. I was in a call earlier today with a vendor that messes around in open source stuff, and they said there was some New York Times story about how open source has matured, and essentially that people don't care about the open part of it anymore. It's not like a big evangelical ideal. So being the preparer that I am, I of course haven't read it, but I'll have to go look it up and see what
But
it
can we
is.
just summarize it? Open source, massive success, but, and this is the big but, it is not going to generate lots of money for corporations. And I think there's a
Yes.
few people it generated. A couple like really well-known guys made a bunch of money. There's the unicorn open source experience of Red Hat. They did, but for the vast majority of everyone else, really just a cost-reducing exercise, not revenue-generating exercise.
Yes. Yeah, no, and I think there's a new feature here in the Google Hangouts where you can put like links in. We'll see what that ends up looking like. Just like me, I'm going to gratuitously experiment with it by putting something in there, and it says it's loading. But like I saw a nice presentation by Andrew Schaefer that it looked like he gave in what does that mean? Show item. This is happening live, Brandon.
Live.
It's
It's
live.
live.
Anyways, I don't want to show it to people anymore. This is terrible.
Now you've done it.
We'll cut this all out, all of it out. Anyways,
Okay.
it was a nice overview of sort of like that he gave at OSCON about the business of open source, and I pulled out my favorite slide, which basically said, in the beginning, it's like in conclusion, business is all about convincing people to give you more money in exchange for something that costs you less than said money. And
That's
I
right.
think I think the snarkiness of it points to the fact that and it also says rinse and repeat underneath. It's easy to lose sight of the point of being in business, especially when open source is involved. And I am always curious, like if, how viable it is. Like it's a continual question, like you said, it's almost boring, but nowadays when the topic comes up, I actually point to companies like Puppet and Chef and everything, just like, yeah, no one says the word open core anymore, but just do that. That's
Just do that and move on.
yeah. And the other thing when doing an open source company, you should consider what your exit plans are, right? If your plan is to be purchased or acquired by another company, that's a whole other thing, right? But if your plan is to like live forever and just make revenue, that's a whole other thing as well. So it is, I think the strategies that large public companies that, aren't planning on being purchased, acquired, is it's different when it comes from open source than small startups who are just looking for traction, if you will, and valuation, which is way out of my keen.
Right. Well, I think it's always interesting, though it is, I haven't seen anyone quite come out this direct and say, if you really are, like Docker's a great example, right? They have this massive round of money. What I think, in listening to the founder of Docker talk, like he really loves, not loves, I guess, or does loves, but really, has tried to borrow from Linux, the model of Linux. And it's like,
yeah.
So instead of taking all that money, right, like setting yourself up as a consortium, almost like a nonprofit kind of like, steward of this, and then convincing, the people that benefit from it, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, right, to just essentially, fund you and allow you to be the gatekeeper of it, right?
Yeah.
Would probably, I think, that kind of is like the evangelical developer, right? It's the technology, almost like the Apache Foundation way of going, right? Like, you don't, by taking all this money, you're going to have to answer the revenue question at some point.
Yeah.
If you could maybe just avoid it and say, I'm going to be a foundation, and I want to technology that is really as infrastructure. It would be interesting for someone to try to do that, to actually like shun the money. Don't take the massive round, right? But I think that's not human nature, but that would probably lead to better outcomes for people that, if you truly are a believer in that kind of open source model.
Yeah. I mean, it also gets to a highly philosophical question we shouldn't tackle, which is like, how much money do you really need to make, right? Like, I think a lot of the long-standing open source things in the systems management area, like OpenNMS and Nagios and things like that, they're sort of, the people in control of them are fine with how much money they make, and they don't need to make more, which is one seems to not really have that luxury so much, but it's that's another quandary, right? Like, maybe you don't need to be a gigantic company. You can just be a small company, and then you don't need to worry about revenue. And then open source is a whole other ballgame. But speaking of revenue, so coincidentally, both you and I read CA's quarterly earnings call transcript, hoopla, in the last 24 hours. So we should go over that. I'll try to show another item. Show item. I think what it's doing is rotating through images that are on my page, which is not accurate, but that's fine. Anyways, so you know what I did, because as I was talking about before we were recording, I'm a little adrift at the moment for no good reason. Is I came across this new version of Markdown called Critic Markup. You know how, like, I'm sure you know this, Brandon, how you go into a Word doc and you add in comments and deletions and suggestions, track changes, right?
Yes, of course.
So there's a Markdown syntax for that called Critic Mark up, down, something. And so I thought I'd read through the transcript of CA's quarterly call and use it as an excuse to practice that and kind of do like a little do-it-yourself rap genius thing, or genius as they call it now. And yeah, it was kind of fun. It's fun to read through like business talk and put in some little marginalia and commentary and stuff like that. But as a side effect is actually the intended effect. Like now, I have a nice quarterly view of CA, and it does seem like, to summarize it, being an analyst, I should type this up and publish it. But it does seem like they're an interesting example of a company that is trying to transform itself, which you couldn't really always say of CA so much and other software companies in the past. But you can tell they have the proverbial burr up their ass, as it were, to like actually do something different. So as an example, like they have 3 core strategies, right? I think it's like enterprise IT management, security, and DevOps. Like, who would make DevOps one of their core corporate strategies?
Crazy,
right?
crazy.
I mean, obviously, I think it's a good idea and stuff, but it does show a high degree. You wouldn't get other companies. CA is like a $4 billion company or so, right? Even companies that size, you wouldn't expect to see a BMC be like, DevOps is one of our core strategies. And so they're obviously like, and then if you read through, how do you say the CEO's name? I'm always careful when I see all those kind of vowels together with G's and R's. I don't want to try to butcher it, but he speaks to a lot of the how you need to change an old company into a new company types of things quite well, with just enough actual like pragmatic explanation of what it is to be credible. And also having been the CEO of Taleo, which is sort of like an ASP now positioned as a SaaS, if I remember. We had to use that at Dell. It was delightful.
Loved it. I can tell you loved it.
Oh yeah, it was. There's nothing I like more than a Flex application. And so said the guy who's just experimenting with Markdown dialects and variants. You can imagine I love Flex. Anyways. It was an interesting read. I mean, there'll be a good case study like from about a year ago to about over a 5-year period to see if anything happens, because their revenues are like steadily declining. They've got a cash cow of mainframe that seems to throw off a lot of cash but is declining. It's all declining, and they've got the problem, as the CEO puts it, they have a sales force of elephant hunters who do big deals, and as he repeatedly says, in not so few words, I don't like that. Right? Like, we need to, as I was putting in my commentary, we need to go do marmot hunting, or at least horse hunting, right? Like, we need to do a whole bunch of smaller deals, at least relative to like 7-8 figure deals, and as something you would be somewhat familiar with, basically we need the SolarWinds model plus SaaS. Like, that's kind of the position that most all legacy infrastructure companies are in. They're trying to do the SolarWinds plus model, which is challenging. And if you kind of, like when we were talking about press releases about the IBM Apple thing last week, if you know how to like read business talk, so to speak, you can pick up a lot of the interesting challenges that comes with that transformation, if you will. So I don't know. No. I thought it was a fun read.
No, I thought it was good. I mean, many thoughts on it. It's like one for anyone that wants to get through the press release. Like, I think here's a quick tip. It's like there's always like two types. One, the Q&A is always the best. Like that's where you get some good stuff. But there's two types of analysts that actually ask questions. There's the financial guy, the MBA guy that's a little bit younger, and he's responsible for updating the model, the company like investment bank's model. And they ask these like really esoteric, like, hey, how was the revenue, constant cost basis, currency exchange? And like, I have no idea what they're talking about. Like, but it's clear that he has this Excel spreadsheet. He's trying to figure out what number to put in it.
Totally.
So like you have to like, and it's like, unfortunately, it's like every other question, right? Every other question is like, help me update my model with this obscure question I have. But so I
even put in some marginalia just making fun of that. Like,
okay, so skip, like if you're reading it to like see what's going on, just skip that question when you figure out what it is. It's usually in the first few lines. But then the product in questions are really interesting because there's a lot of questions about new revenue growth on the enterprise side, which was which just makes a lot of sense. And this is where I think it's clear, right? I mean, it's clear that they know and this is what I don't like when people criticize, like hey, this is an old company, nobody gets what's going on. It's like, I actually think lots of people at CA totally see what's happening, right? And it's like, well, what do we do? So to your point, Cote, they're definitely trying to evolve a SaaS and a SMB inside sales model. The question, though, and this is always the hard question for a company like that, is I think their differentiator is their sales force, right? That's the thing. It's like at this point, technology and their products have somewhat been overshadowed by the fact that they have phenomenal relationships with like 500 to 800 of the world's biggest companies that pay them a ton of money, right? And this is the problem, right? Is like it's like you never are what you want to be. It's like, hey, that's great, and they're going to be really profitable from being that, but they're not happy with that because it doesn't, Wall Street doesn't value that like it values a high growth SaaS business or a high growth.
No,
that's the thing they have to kind of fight against.
That's an interesting theory to posit there. That and to over contextualize it as I want to do, right? Like when I talk with most companies, but infrastructure companies who are in the same business as CA on the other end, who are startups, they kind of have is it contrapositive? They have the opposite problem. They usually have highly differentiated, interesting technology, but they're hunting marmots, right? And they constantly want to know how they can get elephants to like buy their stuff. They want to know where the elephants are, and so in a sense, that's the challenge that a big company has, and what someone like the stars of the tech space they tend to do is they tend to straddle these lines. Like they have innovative new features, and they also sell big accounts as well as volume accounts, if you will. And that is a hard thing to shift from. So it's yeah, I don't know. Like I again, to build on part of what you were saying, that was one of the threads that I read very closely in the transcript. Was sort of like, what is he saying about sales and transforming sales and the rate that that's occurring? So you'll see there's lots of talk about like this pipeline exists, and they're not converting. They're basically not ABCing or always be closing on those deals enough, right? Sign on the line that is dotted.
I'll tell you though, there was some real nuggets in there that I thought I was actually surprised they released, because I think they talked a lot about the free product NimSoft Snap.
Yeah.
And, I think it was 9,000. How many did he say?
Let me see. I have it here in
I don't want to misquote it.
Transcript. Yeah, he said that has been downloaded by approximately 9,000 customers. Now,
right. So
that could mean downloads, paid accounts, or both, or one of the
Well,
other.
it doesn't. I guess let's just give it full credit, right? Like,
yeah.
I think this is a little exercise for the reader, because I think before they said, in the last quarter they said it was like 4,000. So I don't know. Let's just call it 5,000 new downloads in the quarter, and it's like, okay, well, like really, if this is your inside sales model, and let's say every one of those is a lead, that means you got 5,000 leads, and okay, well, how big is your sales force? Your sales force is like several thousand people, so you're only getting a couple leads per outside rep. Or if you say I have a whole dedicated inside team, we'll do the math. Like an inside sales rep should make 50 calls a day, and how many do you have? And you have 5,000. Like that, if you're making the big transition, like I guess my whole point is that volume is not going. That volume needs to be a lot higher for you to really start to turn transactions at a level that would affect your business. So
right. If you're going to do the SolarWinds plus model or whatever.
Yeah, or just inside sales just in general. Like, how are you feeding these guys? No, and to fairness, right? I'm sure they have many other lead generation programs and things like that, but it just gives you a window into like, hey, yeah, CA has lots of money and they have lots of smart people, but like it takes a long time to build up, a download or lead generation model that can feed and really ultimately affect the top line number. And
they released that like earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, for around that time period.
Yeah, I think they said it came out in Q4, so they have time to ramp it up and they can grow it, but it just shows you, like I said, that number's got to go up.
Yeah, well, when I was doing my little marginalia, I went and looked up App Dynamics and New Relic's numbers from 451, and the last numbers that I found that we had is that App Dynamics has 1,300 paying customers, right? Not just downloads.
Right.
And I didn't look up downloads because I'm lazy. And
they do sign-ups, registrations.
Yeah,
right?
and that New Relic has 15,000 paying customers. So, you can do the math on those with whatever variables you want to see what the fat end of the funnel has to look like for that. And to be fair, App Dynamics and New Relic have been at that for much longer than whatever CA's Q4 is. They have some wacky financial calendar I haven't even found the translator for. Because apparently they're reporting revenue from 2015, so they have a time machine.
So what's your take, Cote? I mean, this would be great. Get your analyst brain on this. Like, I don't know, like, what's up with the lawsuit? Like, I'm just sort of like, I was like, wow.
Oh, like the App Dynamics. So CA has a lawsuit against App Dynamics and New Relic, right? And yeah, I just read the. Here, look. Let me share this with our viewers, Brandon.
Okay.
And we'll see what this has. This is known as the experimenting podcast. Anyways, yeah, I think you'd correct me where I'm wrong, but CA bought this company Wiley that did 3-tier APM a while ago, and essentially, I think the people from Wiley left and started New Relic and App Dynamics. Obviously, not both companies. The groups of people split off and did that, and obviously, I'm not a lawyer, and neither is Brandon, and all of that nonsense. But I think the allegations that CA says they have proof of is that they were working on the App Dynamics code while still employed by CA, which that would be a bummer for App Dynamics. But yeah, it is like, what was the other lawsuit that came up? I was thinking to compare this to. Like, there's also also there's news this week that confirming that AWS has a $600 million CIA contract, and you remember IBM had sued over that for something, and yeah, so I mean, I'll say two things. So in a somewhat related thing, I had a discussion with a I don't know if they're a client. They sure should be. With the client of ours who had some sort of legal thing like, oh, I need to get a letter to send a lawyer to send a letter about this crazy thing that happened. And I was like, hey, look, are you going to make good product or like have lawyers, right? Like, I in general, like my feel for legal shenanigans in the tech world is like, how about you just make a better product and then win that way?
Well, that's like now I can't comment. I don't really know anything about them.
Yeah. Like now that said, if there's some sort of like IP, misappropriation shenanigans involved, then it's, I don't know. It is problematic.
Go back to like the fundamental question. It's like, because like you always think like just kind of like forget about the merits of the law. So like neither one of us really know. But the question always comes back just like, well, what's the purpose, right? Like sometimes. So like sometimes I think you either file this because you want to get someone's attention and you just want to like settle out of court, right? Like there seems like there's a lot of times like a company will make an example of an employee that went to another and be like, hey, they're under NDA, right? But really what ends up happening is like the settlement is just like there's no money exchange. It's like, yeah, we agree we're gonna let that guy work there and we agree not to solicit or hire anymore from this group, right?
Yeah.
And so like there's a clear outcome, right? And I think. So it's like one outcome for CA could just be like, hey, we got to protect our IP. I guess that's sort of like the most obvious. But another is like, are you trying to like I don't know, like are you trying to position yourself in some way with that deed? Do you want to scare off the customers? Like
let's use a historic example from way back when. And I'm always forgetting the name of this company. But what was the Daryl McBride company that was always suing Linux that had its own Unix variant? Wasn't it Daryl McBride
SUSE or something? Or
no, not SUSE still exists, but there was I always forget it. But there was a Unix company, and they SCO. It was Santa Clara.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yes, you're right.
And so I think they were an example of like, as a large incumbent company, the tactics of suing stuff like this, as far as I can tell, are basically the very genuine thing, as you were saying, of like, well, you stole my toys, so I'm going to get them back, right? Like, there is just it's a straightforward patent problem, and we own the patents, you use the patents, and that's why patents exist, so that you can't use them, right? So there's sort of that, which is intellectually something, but I think what follows on from that is, well, conceivably, you're eroding our profits. Right? Like we can command a premium price, as the strategy people say, because we're the only ones who can produce this, and that's how we make money. So if someone comes around and makes money cheaper, then that damages our business. It's like in the three-dimensional world, price dumping is a similar thing, right? Like if a foreign government is subsidizing a manufacturer making something at a loss, whether it's tires or chicken legs or furniture, and then that gets dumped in another market, then that's that doesn't really work. It's just unfair, essentially. Now, the issue becomes like it gets annoying in the tech world, because as sort of like a tech purist, you usually don't like patents and you don't like IP law of any type, I guess, unless it attacks you. And then you have that kind of like silly reaction I was having, is like, well, how about your products just suck less? and then people will buy them, right? Like and I don't think that's the right reaction at all, but it is. I think, to put it yet another way, I think only large companies can get away with like this kind of legal stuff, right? Like, because it's almost like, especially if you're a public company, there's a whole other concern that you have all these shareholders and they're like, why aren't you suing the pants off of these people?
Right.
Right.
So that's like a good reason, though. Like you're saying, maybe it is to demonstrate to shareholders that you're aware of it and that you're trying to protect it. I guess sometimes I just stand back and I look at it. I'm like, I just don't know, like, what is the outcome? Like, okay, fine. What is the right outcome, or that what wants to do? What do they want to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this case, it's like if I was conniving, I would use the outcome to try to like either acquire, shut down, or get money from App Dynamics. Right?
Right.
That's I'd be like, yeah, obviously this technology works because you had that 1,300 paying customers. So now you owe me. Essentially, it's like
Yeah, I
when
guess that's the most.
when Tony Soprano comes to get that money from the sports store guy, and he's like, guess what? We own you now.
That's right.
And
We're taking
just run it to the
it on.
ground.
I guess you could say that's sort of like, to me, the most Machiavellian kind of view of it is, yeah, this is a way, almost like an activist investor hedge fund would. I'm going to drive down the value, and then I'm going to either get direct compensation for it, or I'm going to get a piece of that company.
Yeah.
Which I guess is I guess it is their right to attempt that. It just feels like, I don't know.
Yeah,
It doesn't feel so good.
And there's Microsoft is always a good example of like points of patent lawsuits, right? And I'm probably going to get this totally wrong, but if I remember, there's basically like some sort of FAT32 patent or patents that they have that causes them to get money from every single smartphone sale. Right?
Okay, so they get like $1 or 10 cents.
Yeah, yeah, and so they have some cluster of patents that like every single smartphone or most of them have to use what the patents do, and so and I remember at one time someone used to estimate or track this, and I might get this wrong, but Microsoft would make hundreds of millions of dollars off of Android in like a comical time period, right? Like we're like, ooh, Android is one of the things attacking them, and now Microsoft is actually making significant revenue. That's all
right.
Profit, basically.
So you kind of have these long patent trolls or patent payoffs over long periods of time.
Yeah, but it is like, yeah, I mean, in general, like I said, I mean, I think it's, if you're a big company, then sure, you can go off and sue people, but definitely as a small company, it's not cool to be
Well,
sued.
it is interesting though, but both BMC and CA, like, it is an awesome case study to see how it plays out, because they both have like cash cows that seem to be declining at a very slow rate, right? Whereas we go back to old school Sun, where kind of Linux sort of just took over and ate Solaris and that high-end margin boxes, big iron, like almost overnight. So it was like, oh, there's really, like, you got to be really, really quick to make a move there, right? Whereas I think it's clearly everyone can see BMC and CA, like everyone can see it coming. I guess the question is, can you do anything about it?
Yeah, no, and I mean, maybe to close out on that topic, like it is, it's another interesting thing, thread to have in your head with if you go read the transcript for the 0.7 people who will, like, is essentially like there's this continuous conversation of timing when revenues will hit, when change will happen, and basically both I think he's a CFO or the SVP was a CFO, whatever. The finance guy and the CEO repeatedly are like, we think at the end of the second half of the financial year this will all take effect. Like they say it over and over again, which and there's kind of a funny point where the CEO is like, well, based on science, we know, well, that's why I'm doing this, and I'm interpolating as it were, but I think what he means is like, we've gathered metrics and figured out the velocity of clearing out the pipeline and closing deals, and if we extrapolate from our current like pipeline, that means that like over this course of time we'll close these deals plus renewals, and it's probably a shift of business from how things used to be when you move to the high velocity of the SolarWinds ++ model. But just to show you how annoying and difficult it must be to deal with financial analysts, there's one of the questions where some guy's like, oh, hey, what's going on? I've been on a bunch of other calls, so sorry if someone's asked this already. When did you think that revenue was going to come in?
Right. That's all back to the I need to update my model right now.
And the CFO I almost missed it. I thought that they hadn't transcribed it. He gives a 2-character, I guess 3-character if you conclude the period, a 2-character answer. He says Q4. Right? Because they had answered that question so many times. But and it's fine. Of course, this guy gets like triple booked and he can't like listen in to all the calls or whatever. We're all busy people. But it's kind of funny that that's sort of what you have to deal with.
No, but when I listen to it, like when I listen to those calls, I always think to myself, like, man, maybe everyone should just put like a Google Doc up of their models, right? And then you could just like link in the cells, be like, all right, here's all the stuff. I'm just going to like input it in for you. Can automatically update your model for you, which of course I know will never happen because all these banks build special models and that's their secret sauce. But it is just funny. Like, half the calls are like, hey, I'm trying to update my model so I can like, send out my research note against my new projections. And it's just, I don't know. It's just funny.
Yeah. As you can imagine, as an industry analyst, I spend a lot of time thinking about what would be good just to put up on Google Docs and not
not like go through the whole production process.
No, I mean it's true. There's so much content that an analyst, be they financial or industry, so much of the content that they create that basically putting it on a public Dropbox or Google Docs share would destroy your company. And it is like it always makes you not question as in you doubt, but like really explore the value of the type of work that you do, right? Like it's kind of back to that patent con. The only value of the work, or a lot of the work, the typing, is the fact that you have to pay to get it, which sounds like some annoying Zen Buddhist statement, right? But there's no intrinsic like thing to it other than I'm making you pay for it.
Right.
Going back to the whatever. That's kind of a silly. So anyways, speaking of updating models, someone was joking with me about this. Apparently, Amazon is all in on private cloud. It just has to be a $600 million private cloud.
Yes. How funny is that? It is just me. I guess everyone, the internet itself, was having fun with that. Like after all the long diatribes, the lashings, the like being talked down upon, that there is no such thing as a private cloud, and why would you there's only on premise. It's amazing. I mean, not amazing, but your point. I guess your point in the headline is like, yes, for $600 million, there is a private cloud, and I think this is the awesome question, though. It's like, because now there is like all of Wall Street sitting there, and they have lots of money, and many or most of their IT managers and IT staff are very used to running things internally, and I think they have to all be saying to themselves like, "Yep, I think I want one too." What's it going to be?
I mean, to put it another way, I think AWS did its marketing for the next 12 months.
It is. I mean, it really did, right?
They're on their enterprise sales calls will be like this. I only need 5 minutes. The CIA uses our cloud. So here's my card. I'm happy to talk.
I'll see you later, right? I totally. Well, so the question I have though for Amazon, right, is like, well, what does that actually mean too? Because like, how many of the, if you just say like they're getting it, like, do they get like everything? Do they get all the AWS services? Do they just get like the infrastructure side, or do they get like Redshift? How does all that work?
I have not studied this closely, but I would imagine that would be kind of the goal, right? Because if you'll pull, I learned that screeding is what you do when you lay a foundation and level the cement, which is interesting. So if you'll allow me some screeding to lay a foundation. It seems like there's a few interesting things going on here. One, when I don't know if you guys encounter this, but when I talk to people who want private cloud, it's usually framed like the following, like some insane amount of the time. Like, well, everyone wants to use Amazon, but I can't have that, so I need to build a private cloud. So I would imagine like and I kind of remember reading some of this in the coverage, like, the developers and system integrators and the constellation of people around the CIA are like, yeah, I'd like to use Redshift. That sounds great. Right? Like they all want that. So I would imagine it, if not at the moment, like eventually they'll migrate services, like everything over to it. And if they don't, then that's fine, but that's a lot to spend if you're not getting all of that. And I think the other interesting thing, like you remember that terrible screening I did about Rackspace? Like it's interesting to look at this as a missed deal for Rackspace, because the idea of managing someone's cloud, right? That's Rackspace's thing. And this would seem to be like the apex of that, right? Like we would love to like run and we would love to have a public-private cloud as this sort of is that we manage for you. So I think that can be good and bad for someone like Rackspace. For one thing, it's always good to have competition so you can explain yourself better. It's good for Rackspace to be like, yeah, that's what we're talking about, right? And then they need to actually have the capability and feature set and everything to be able to do it. But and then also, yeah, I mean, to your point of Wall Street, right? It would be interesting. I could start being one of those annoying analysts and actually ask questions and just ask Amazon what their floor is for a cloud. Like, is it 50 million, 100 million? What's the floor?
Well, I think that's the whole question, right? Because I think it is. It's like, be careful what you ask for. It's like, so clearly Amazon has it. Like, I think one way to view it is like, hey, this was a one-time event. It was a huge amount of money. CIA had some of the most specific security problems in the world, so that's why we did it there. But it's not gonna, it's not gonna happen again. But it does. Like, if they take that approach, right? they clearly leave this door open, right? Because I think, all the financial institutions, insurance institutions are going to be like, listen, the CIA is doing it this way. We think of our value as just as valuable, so we're going to do something similar, right? So there's that, and then there's the question of like, okay, well, for all of Amazon's success, like it's certainly, I don't think of it as like a big consulting firm, or they've going to go out and build tons. Maybe they are. It's just like, are they really going to staff up to the point to go start building this for all these companies? And does that fundamentally start to change? And this is the really interesting question, is like, because that's going to slow them down, right? That's what always happens. You run the enterprise and this stuff slows down your development cycle. So does that then start to alienate the development community that really made them, right? So does like DigitalOcean and these other guys start to rise up because they're going much, much faster, which up until now has really been Amazon.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be way out of my technical depth, right? I mean, you can, I forget how many regions Amazon has, right? But in theory, you just like give a region over to the one customer, but you still run everything. Now, you still run everything like you would everything else. Now, the problem is that you probably need completely different staff. You can't commingle the data and the management of the networks. Like, it has to be completely disconnected from your actual cloud stuff, right? And if they've built the system such that there's one mega mom, one manager of managers that the Amazon ops people use, right? Then it does have those inefficiencies you were talking about. But if they have a way of basically saying like, our I don't know where they have data centers. Our Virginia data center has $600 million worth of nodes, and it requires 100 admins, and they can just have all of that.
Right.
Right. Now,
well, the question I always have, the thing that makes me very almost skeptical, and just lots of experience here, is like, hey, they did this deal with $600 million. Like, if it truly is, like, it's going to be 100% the same, fair enough. But like most of the time when people pay this amount of money, they asked for some customizations, right? It's like buying a house. When you get to a certain price of a house, you can have the special bathroom and the special fixtures that are all custom, right? That really drive the price up. But if you're willing to pay for them, you can have them. And I think that's my question with a deal like this. Is like my belief, my instincts just tell me that, like, hey, the CIA loaded in some special requirements, like, hey, security needs to be like this, or whatever it is.
It would be, to put it one way, it would be shocking if they did not have the following requirement, which was, before you upgrade anything, we need to look at it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And audit it and make sure it works. Right. Like, you can't just like update S3. Like, we need to go like look at the code, make sure that, like, our enemies didn't touch it, and do all of this stuff. And then once you do that, you're dead.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
like,
that's the question, right? You're in a fundamentally different business. You're in a fundamentally different business than you are with the public cloud. So, to me, it really does. I mean, I think of Rackspace and IBM, like, I actually think it's a win, right? I mean, you lost that deal.
Absolutely.
But the biggest cloud provider in the world has now endorsed private cloud, and it's like you reap what you sow, right? I don't know. I mean, is that the right strategy for Amazon? Is it, if their goal is to be like a $100 billion retail company, and now they're getting in this other business, like, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure they thought all of that through.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think it's extremely beneficial for anyone who wants to build and sell private cloud, and then do the public-private cloud, as I like to call it, because it just it's good validation, and you would expect other government agencies and there must be people following it, like, because it's just makes sense.
Well, absolutely. You got to think NSA, DoD, right? I mean, where does the line? I don't.
And then there's all those other governments, right? or as they call it, RAW, rest of world.
That's right. Well, the other interesting, touches on our topic last week, right? We talked about Apple and about how the consumer technology of iOS kind of being sucked into the enterprise, right, through IBM. And I think this is another good example of, like, this is the old Red Monk, your old days, right, about, everything starts with the developer. Like, the developer sort of has made AWS as successful as possible, which has really kind of driven and pushed this in, kind of culminating with the government saying, yeah, we want AWS. In fact, not only do we want it, we'll pay a premium for it, because we believe it gives us access to a higher talent base, or a better talent base of developers who are going to actually work on this stuff. So that's interesting to see. And again, like kind of like we talked about last week, it's like who wins out here? Does AWS, like, is Amazon in there saying absolutely keep it simple, keep it consistent, that's why you bought us, or does it get in there and slowly, get all these crazy requirements and start to diverge really quickly?
Yeah. No, I mean that's the main architectural pattern they have is to protect them. To put it another extreme way, they need to make sure that the CIA's AWS isn't the upstream code branch that everything checks out from, right? Like, because you just, like we're saying, just say it again, you just have to assume that the CIA's cloud is going to be on a slower release cadence, as they say, than the public AWS, right?
Right.
And then you've got two different teams doing things, and things get a little wonky. So somehow they have to use an old term that one of my Red Monk buddies like, they need to do some pace layering and make sure that there's proper abstraction between everything and all that nonsense, which is true, but that'll be fun to see pan out. So what else have you been seeing happening this week? We were talking a little bit. Maybe you were pointing out that, speaking of developers, that Yahoo bought Flury, right? And
Yeah.
I think I went and read our 451 report on it, which pointed out a good insight that basically Yahoo doesn't have a mobile platform, so in order to cash in on this stream, they need other tools. And it seemed like the figures we had is that there's like 170,000 developers in 150 countries that use the Flury analytics platform, if you will, and over 400,000 applications. So that's a nice way to participate, if you will. But back to our open source conversation, like it said they give the analytics away for free, and then they sell. The way that Flury makes money is they sell that data that gets generated from that.
Right, for the advertisers and this other stuff. So yeah, so I mean, I guess on the face of it, right? Why not? I mean, it kind of just feels like with Yahoo, right? It's just kind of the same thing over and over. It's like, well, they need a mobile strategy. They're not going to build a phone, or they haven't built a phone yet.
Yeah.
They don't have an operating system, and it's like, and they do have a bunch of money, and so they're kind of just buying this stuff. But like, I don't know. Does it? I mean, like, I don't see I didn't look. The stock didn't seem to react in any big way. It just feels like this is what you do when you're in this kind of company, right? You're like, I have a lot of money, and I just maybe going to try to buy my way out of it, and if I can hit something big, great. But it doesn't look like all that inspired, right? You're like, yeah, Flury's a good tool. Yeah, it's a good business, but I don't really see why.
This is making me think, Brandon, that a good way to tank my personal cash flow is I should deeply study Yahoo and CA. They both seem like similar companies in the positions that they're in, right?
Right.
With at least if your head's way up the niche of technology with very different businesses and technologies, right?
Right.
And so it is like it's Yahoo's an even more challenging one. Like I think to use the overly simplified Simon Sinek or whatever his name is thing, like there's no why of Yahoo. Like no one's quite sure what their deal is. and
I think it goes back to like all the executive changes. I kind of come back to this book I recommended last week, Halo Effect, and it's like correlation causation. So it's like they've changed out a bunch of executives. It's like Melissa Mayer, I believe is how you say it, or Meyer, right. I'm never sure. Super smart, right? But she clearly rose up, and her time at Google was correlated with this massive success, right? So it's like, and of course she's been written up a million times about all the stuff that she does, and she has office hours, and she's developer focused, and it's like, okay, but those are just like correlating things. It's like, why, always the assumption is like, well, because now she's at Yahoo, she'll just, have that same type of success. And if you look at what she's good at, or what, she made her name at, was like product, right? Like developing organic products, right? I don't think necessarily she was as well known for M&A at Google. I mean, maybe we can argue that, but, and it's just like, so now like she's over there and she's just, she seems to be buying lots of companies, and there doesn't like seem to be a lot of organic, products. So it's like, what, like, what are you doing? Like, why did you, it's like, it seems like what the strength was to build organic products, but you're not doing any of that. You're just buying this stuff. So it just seems like it's just going to play itself out, right? Like, it's like, well, we'll buy a bunch of stuff, and if something hits, great, and if not, someone else will rotate in. And the next guy will obviously be opposite of her, so he'll be like a media guy. He'll be like a media ad guy. And then, and then everyone will write the opposite, like, why don't they build new products? And so you just, again, like, it seems very clear from the outside, and and maybe there is no, at the end, right, it's always back to like differentiation, right, and understanding your customer base and all that stuff. And it's like, hey, Yahoo and CA, right, those people are very smart. They probably see it really well, but it just may not be possible without some really, really good luck or some like deep, deep insight to really turn them around. And that's why I always think, if you found yourself as on a board of one of these companies, maybe what you need to go look out is for like somebody that's not a big name, that's truly a turnaround guy, right? In the vein that you want, like somebody that's probably really off the radar. That I just would like to see someone try that rather than, someone that's been at a place that's successful and kind of getting the job because they were, correlation, not so much causation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and then there's even more sort of like troubles you're beset with. Like, did you see that that Elliott Management PE firm is trying to get EMC to sell off its VMware and Pivotal stakes? Like,
really?
And then you hit the sort of like the buccaneers of like financial engineering who are like, never mind the strategy, right? Like,
yeah, well, it's over when those guys get involved. It's definitely over. Right?
Yeah, and they're just like, here's what you do. Basically, you're going to sell off this bit, the 80% of VMware that you own, and then that gives you a chunk of change, and you pay out a dividend, and then I'm done, right? And then I cash out, and it's just sort of like, man, that's got to be annoying to deal with, because you're like, but you don't understand. We're in enterprise storage, which is theoretically sort of like a declining market, so we need to diversify so that we have rising markets that are valuable so that we can live forever. And then the guy comes in and he's like, oh, sorry, I've been on lots of calls. When's that revenue going to hit? Like,
it does bring up an interesting question. Like I was reading something about, like the whole use of like dual class stock, right? The Fox, whatever, made the bid for Time Warner, and the reason they can do that, I guess, and one of the reasons they said that they can do it is they basically can offer all this like non-voting stock, right? And Google has that like structure, and Facebook has that structure, and like because your earlier point, right? The problem is like there's no one investor to talk to. Like what if you could just talk to like the one investor, like, hey, what are you most interested in from my company? Do you want steady cash flow? You want this to really grow? You want like, what is it you really want? And it's like, well, there's no one speaks with one voice. So it's like, well, like take Yahoo or CA, like they have all this money coming in, and it's like, well, we could give it back, right? But certain investors will be frustrated that you do that, because you're not growing it and they want growth. And other people, you can say, well, I can go out and buy some acquisitions, and other people will be like, that's a waste of money, right? And then, or I can start building stuff. And it's like, there's always like a third, right? Like somebody's always really unhappy. And, of course, like everyone just wants the stock to go up, but they all have their own opinion. So I almost wonder, and there's a lot of problems with dual class stock, but like in some ways, it presents like, that benevolent dictator model where it's like, listen, they can just say what they're going to do. Like Facebook is like, if you're an investor in Facebook, I think it's very clear. You're giving your money to Mark Zuckerberg, and you believe in what he wants to do. He wants to go buy a bunch of stuff and build a bunch of stuff. And like, if you're not on board, well, then you shouldn't own it. It's really, really clear what's going to happen. And then you get to other companies like Yahoo. It's like, well, there's like a million different opinions about what should be done. And the board of Yahoo can only make very minimal attempts to satisfy everyone.
Yeah, it's got to be maddening.
It is. It's got to be a hard job, right? You can see why people make a lot of money that do it. It's definitely a hard job.
Yeah. Well, why don't we close out with our recommendations, Brandon? Do you want to start? What do you recommend this week?
I think I'm just going to just make it very simple today. I've been in product management a long time, and one of the books I read, there's always this talk in product management about like getting customer feedback, and like, but to distill it down, this book one says like, hey, before you build any new product, before you write a line of code, before you build the marketing plan, before you do anything, like just go talk to 100 prospective customers. So I don't know. I think it's like both brilliant and impossible. So I would just say like to anyone that wants to build a new company, like you don't have to read all the books, you don't have to read Lead Startup, you don't have to read them all. Just go talk to 100 potential customers about your idea, and you probably will be your chances of success will be much higher than many of the people that have tried before you.
Yeah. So how do you find those 100 customers?
I think that part I think is the unfortunate boring stuff, and this is why I think it's so hard to do. Is like you got to go to LinkedIn, you got to call on your friends, you got to like look up your industry analyst, you got to go just walk into their places of business or call on their places of business, and try to get some meetings. And I think it's usually like I think someone in inside sales would be like it's a lot easier to get a meeting than to sell, but most people don't wake up in the morning wanting to go make the calls and emails and contacts to go get 100 prospective customers. But and I think it's just revealing, right? Like if you did it, it's really hard, but if you did it and you committed to it, at the end, I don't know if you may end up deciding not to start the business because you probably would have learned so much that, hey, maybe that wasn't a good idea, or you'll start something else. But I think just like setting that goal, right? Like making that the number one goal, and I'm sure people that listen to this are like to build technology and like to market technology and things like that. And it's sort of like, again, it's like motherhood and apple pie, but it's like, I don't know, I just wake up every day thinking like, really, that's what I should do more of. I should just spend more time talking to prospective customers. And then somehow I don't always do that.
Yeah. Well, it's hard because your research doesn't seem to make money directly. It's a long-term payoff. Just like CA's turnaround. Well, my recommendation is equally simple. Try sesame seed oil. Like every now and then I'm at the grocery store and I remember how delicious sesame seed oil is. Obviously used in cooking, not on its own. It's okay on its own. But it really is like, man, it's delicious. I don't know what the health properties are, good or bad, but for example, I made a little one of those garbanzo bean salads, and instead of just using olive oil, I use sesame seed oil, and it's got a very distinct taste. That's look that up. Don't be afraid to use. All right. Well, with that, as always, we've got all of our junk over at softwaredefinedtalk.com, and we're in the iTunes. I even downloaded that new podcast app. What is it called? Overcast that Marco guy made, which is pretty nice.
Pretty good.
We're listed in there too, so that's great. So we're
fantastic.
We do need some better album cover art, which I think you pointed out. I have noticed that what you're supposed to do with podcast, so says the guy who's been podcasting since like 2005, that what you're supposed to do nowadays is actually have the title in your cover art. It's very key.
Okay.
You don't just have a picture. So I'm going to look into these picture things. See what we can do. All right. Well, we'll see everyone next time.
Take care.